I used to think loneliness had a sound. Not a crying sound, not a dramatic one. More like the refrigerator hum behind the counter at the diner, steady and indifferent. It was the same sound every morning, before the lunch rush, before the talk got loud enough to cover everything people didn't want to notice. And for a long time, I was sure I was the only one who heard it. I would come in before the place was fully awake. The bell above the door would ring once, like a small announcement that I was still moving through the world, still capable of getting myself a table and paying for coffee. I never tried to be invisible, I just didn't have the energy to be anything else. My hands were always a little rough from work. I'd learned early that people noticed hands before faces, and they also noticed how a man moved when he didn't want to take up space. I walked in quietly, sat where I could see the entrance, and ordered the same thing I always ordered: black coffee and eggs with toast. The diner had its regulars. They greeted each other like they had a shared history written in small talk. Folks compared sports scores, talked about their kids, talked about the weather like it was something you could argue with and win. The waitress, she'd been there long enough to know who tipped well and who forgot their manners, would set down my plate and my coffee without making a production out of it. But the other customers didn't talk to me. They talked around me. That was the pattern. A pause when I sat down. A glance at my jacket, then away. A quick look at my posture like they were trying to decide whether I would start something or stop something. Most of the time, I didn't give them anything to work with. I didn't frown at people. I didn't stare. I ate. I waited. And because I waited so quietly, they filled the waiting with their own fear. That was the trick about being overlooked. When nobody sees you clearly, they see whatever they need. Some mornings I'd hear the words before I looked up. Is he okay? He looks like he could get angry. Maybe he's on something. Nobody asked me. Nobody stood in my way. They just shifted their chairs by a few inches, like distance could protect them from whatever story they'd written in their minds. I didn't correct them. I didn't tell them about the years behind my eyes. I didn't tell them about the things I carried that weren't visible. There were parts of me that didn't feel like mine to explain. So I kept coming back. I told myself it was routine. It was safety. It was a simple way to keep my day from collapsing into darkness. Inside, I knew the truth was uglier. I kept coming back because I wanted to matter to someone who didn't owe me anything. I wanted to be a normal man eating breakfast. Not a threat. Not a rumor. Not a problem. Over time, the diner learned my habits better than I learned theirs. The first time someone watched me like I was a problem, it was small. A young couple came in and didn't sit in my section. They went to the far booth as if the air between us had teeth. The woman's eyes flicked to my table as she ordered, and I could tell she was making a decision, whether she would speak to her partner about it, whether she would hold her tongue. I kept my gaze on my plate. I thought that would be enough. It never was. The next week it got worse. A man at the counter, someone with a loud laugh and the kind of confidence that made people assume he'd never been corrected, leaned toward his friend and said, "That guy's been here forever. You ever notice he never talks?" His friend answered without looking at me, "Never mind, I'm not getting mixed up with that." I heard it all. I heard it because the diner's sound wasn't just sound, it was the way people moved their lives around whatever made them uneasy. So I did what I'd always done. I kept my face calm. I finished my eggs. I paid. And I left. In my mind, I could hear the old lesson I'd been taught in different uniforms, in different years. Don't make the situation bigger than it needs to be. Control what you can control. Then came the day someone else decided to control me. It was early again, but not my earliest. The sky outside was that pale winter light that made everything look tired. When the doorbell rang, a few heads turned. My eyes found the booth I liked, an easy angle, a straight sight line to the entrance. I sat down. The waitress called out my order in the same tone she used with the regulars. Black coffee, eggs, toast. She put the coffee down and walked away. That's when I noticed the new man near the window. A thick jacket, a hard stance. He wasn't a regular. His eyes weren't scanning for pancakes or parking spots. His eyes were scanning me. He kept his hands at his sides like he was trying to appear casual while still looking ready. A few minutes later, the phone behind the counter rang. The waitress answered. Her face changed slightly, tightened at the edges. Then she glanced in my direction. I didn't hear the words clearly at first. The diner's music was too low to help. I heard fragments: concern, disorder, safety. I turned my head just enough to catch the angle. The man near the window had moved, not toward the door, toward the counter. People started to notice that I was noticing. They watched the way you watch a pot when you don't know whether the lid is about to rattle. The waitress walked toward him, speaking quietly. I saw the way she pointed, not accusing, just directing. Like, right there, he's seated. And I saw the man in the thick jacket nod once, decisively. In my chest, a familiar feeling rose, something between anger and grief. Not the kind that explodes, the kind that sits like a stone. I didn't know him, but I knew the posture. It was the posture of a man who'd been told someone like me needed to be managed. I kept eating. The coffee was hot. The eggs were hot. I was trying to give my body a reason to stay grounded. But the thick jacket man didn't stop. He approached the counter again, this time with a second person behind him. That's when I saw the uniform. Not a full department uniform, but a local security badge and a company ID. He wasn't police. He wasn't exactly anything official. He was something worse. He was authority that didn't carry accountability. The man behind him, an older one with a calm face, stood close enough that I could see his eyes weren't hostile. They were evaluating. Responsible, even. Like he wanted to do the right thing, but had already decided I was the wrong kind of person. They spoke with the waitress in low voices. Then the older one, his stance slightly forward, his tone firm, walked toward my table. I expected him to ask questions. I expected him to tell me something simple. Instead, he leaned in like he was delivering a verdict. "Sir," he said, "we've had complaints." His eyes didn't search my face for truth. They searched for risk. I didn't flinch. I didn't rise. I nodded once. "What kind?" I asked. He blinked, like my calm voice didn't fit the story he'd already been handed. "Just," he said, and I could tell he was choosing words to avoid specifics. "People feel unsafe. People felt unsafe because of me, because of how I looked, because I sat alone every morning with a quietness that made strangers nervous." The waitress stood a few feet away, her hands clasped in front of her. Her eyes asked a question her mouth wouldn't say. "Don't make this worse." I understood. I didn't want to make it worse. I also didn't want to accept it. So I did something that surprised even me. I reached into my jacket pocket slowly and pulled out my wallet. Not to explain, not to brag, to show something ordinary. My identification. I placed it on the table between us so he could see it without having to invade my space. He stared at the ID like it was going to tell him something about my threat level. Then his gaze lifted. His expression softened by a fraction. Not into apology, into uncertainty. "You're Robert," he said, and it sounded like he was reading my name off a form for the first time. "Yes," I answered. There it was, my name. The first true thing spoken to me that day. I didn't add, "I served." I didn't add anything about my history. I didn't even mention why my shoulders sat a certain way or why my eyes sometimes tracked corners. I just asked calmly, "What exactly happened?" He glanced at the thick jacket man near the window. The thick jacket man shrugged like, "This is all we were told." The older one cleared his throat. "Nothing," he said. "It's just a concern." Concern. As if the word could substitute for a reason. As if fear could be licensed. A few people in the diner shifted in their seats. I felt their attention like heat. And in that moment, I understood the deeper insult. It wasn't that they thought I was dangerous. It was that they thought their discomfort was more important than my humanity. I stood slowly then, not to confront anyone, but to reset the space. My chair scraped softly. The sound drew eyes. The older security man flinched as if he expected movement to turn into violence. I held my hands visible. "I'm leaving," I said. No argument, no lecture. I picked up my coffee, still half full. and I finished paying before anyone could turn the incident into a performance. The waitress looked relieved when I turned away. I walked out. The bell above the door rang again, once, like a closing statement. Outside, the cold air hit my face, and I realized something I hadn't admitted inside. I was tired. Not of walking or eating or getting old. Tired of being watched like I was an emergency. For a few days after, I didn't go back. I told myself I'd moved on. But I didn't really move on. I just replaced one kind of loneliness with another. I tried a different diner. It lasted 3 mornings. The new place had different coffee, different music, but the same quiet shift in the eyes. People didn't say the word threat out loud, but they acted like it. They angled their bodies toward exits. They kept bags clutched to their chest. The 3rd morning, a child pointed at me, then tugged on their mother's sleeve. "Mom, that man looks mad," the kid said. The mother's lips tightened as she pulled the child closer. I heard it, and the sound of it cut deeper than any insult from an adult. Because children don't invent those judgments out of nowhere. Adults teach them the fear. So I didn't sleep well that night. I kept thinking about the ID on my table, the way the security man looked at it like it was supposed to contain a verdict. I started to wonder what would happen if the verdict actually matched my story. Not the story they'd assumed, the real one. A week later, I returned to my original diner anyway. I told myself the decision was simple. The place knew me. The waitress knew me. The morning was part of my routine, and routine was one of the few supports I still had. When I opened the door, the bell rang. My eyes went immediately to the counter. The waitress, now with a different haircut, same fatigue in her eyes, paused when she saw me. Relief flickered there, then something more complicated. Not anger, not fear, recognition. I saw it before she spoke. Then she walked toward me like she'd been holding something back all week. "Mr. Harlan," she said. She used my full name, and that felt like a hand on a shoulder. I didn't ask how she knew it. I already knew people always know more than they admit. "I heard about your concern," she said. Concern again. I waited. She swallowed. "Chief Walker asked me to tell you you're welcome to sit wherever you want. He said it was handled wrong." My stomach tightened, not because I needed an apology, because I needed truth. "Chief Walker?" I asked. She nodded toward the corner of the dining room. There, by the window, a man stood with his coat folded over his arm. He looked like someone who belonged in a place that mattered, like he had authority and responsibility attached to him instead of just a badge. That had been the older one, Chief Walker. I started walking, slow and steady. The diner had a small group of regulars now watching quietly. They didn't stare like before. This time their eyes held embarrassment and curiosity. I stopped a few feet from him. He looked at me the way you look at a file you actually read, not a rumor you heard. Then he extended his hand. "Sir," he said, "I'm sorry, we made an assumption based on how you carry yourself." And I noticed the word made, not had. He wasn't blaming anyone else. He was owning his role. I didn't grip his hand too hard. I shook it once, firmly enough to show I was present. "You said it was handled wrong," I replied. He nodded. "It was. You should never have been approached the way you were." I looked at his face. He looked tired, too. Not the kind of tired that comes from work. The kind that comes from understanding the job will never be perfect. Chief Walker shifted his gaze down and then up again. His eyes caught the edge of my jacket sleeve where the fabric was worn and the seam was repaired. Then he noticed something that made his expression change. Not sudden fear, not sudden anger, a slower change, like a memory was waking up. He leaned forward slightly. "Your patch," he said. I didn't respond with explanation. I didn't ask him how he knew. I simply let his gaze find what it was looking for. I'd stitched it into the inside seam long ago because I didn't want strangers reading it like it was a story they could borrow. But it had been showing lately because the weather and wear had shifted the fabric. "Can I see it?" he asked. The room felt quieter. The waitress stood a little farther back like she'd learned better than to get in the way of truth. I slipped my hand inside my jacket and adjusted the seam, pulling the patch into view enough for him to recognize it. Then I watched Chief Walker's eyes. They didn't widen, they didn't look impressed. They just held steady, as if he'd been waiting his whole life for the right identification to confirm something. Army, he murmured. He didn't say a unit name immediately. He didn't say a rank. He stared at the fabric, then looked up at me. Are you the one who... he started. I cut him off without being rude, not with words, with silence. I had learned that some men could turn recognition into a spotlight that burned the person it was meant to honor. So I let him stop. Chief Walker exhaled slowly. I'm going to be honest with you, he said. I didn't recognize what I was looking at. I only saw what I thought you might be. He paused. And then I went home, and I checked records. Records. That word mattered. It wasn't social media, it wasn't rumor, it was proof. He looked toward the entrance. I'm not the only one who looked, he said. Before I could ask what he meant, a woman stepped in. She moved with purpose, but not aggression. Her eyes scanned quickly, taking in everyone without lingering long enough to feel like judgment. She approached Chief Walker first, and then she looked at me. Her expression turned gentle, like she'd been expecting a conversation all week. Robert, she said. I didn't know her name yet, but when she said my name like she'd read it in a place where names mattered, I felt the air shift. She held a folder under her arm. Chief Walker told me to come, she said. I'm Linda Park. She didn't say veterans advocate, and she didn't say, I work with the department. She just presented herself like an equal who came to tell the truth, not to take credit. Mr. Harlan, she continued, or Robert. The unit patch. People knew it. Not everyone, but the ones who were trained to recognize it would. I watched her mouth carefully, waiting for details that I wouldn't offer. Today I'm not here to ask for a story, she said. I'm here to correct what happened, and I'm here to deliver something. She opened the folder and pulled out a single sheet. Her hands were steady as she held it. This was sent to our community by someone who knew your file, she said. I'm not supposed to read the whole thing out loud, but the summary is enough. She cleared her throat and kept her tone respectful. By the time you were 32, she said, you had already led a team through an operation where you coordinated support under fire. It wasn't a headline kind of event. It was the kind of work nobody remembers until the work keeps people alive. She didn't romanticize it. She didn't dramatize it. Her words were as grounded as the paper in her hands. And afterward, she continued, when you were injured, you didn't stop doing what you were trained to do. You helped others continue safely, without taking credit. That's what your file says. My throat tightened. I swallowed once. I still didn't ask her to continue, because the truth was already there, sitting in my body like a weight I'd carried for decades. Linda Park looked at Chief Walker. You need to know, she said, that the jacket you walked past wasn't just fabric. It was compliance with a promise. Chief Walker nodded. I know now, he said. Around us, the diner quieted even more. Someone at a table dropped a fork and then picked it up like they'd been caught doing something wrong. No one apologized out loud. Not yet. But the shift was visible. People stopped trying to interpret danger. They started trying to interpret shame. Chief Walker returned his attention to me. I want you to sit, he said. It's your right here, and it's not just a policy thing. He paused, searching for words that wouldn't turn the moment into ceremony. It's a human thing. I looked past him. The waitress had my table set again. Same number of chairs, same space on the menu, but everything felt changed, like the diner had been holding its breath and only now realized it was allowed to exhale. I sat down slowly. Linda Park sat across from me but didn't crowd. She asked no questions about war. She asked about the morning. Is the coffee okay? She said. And for a few minutes I got what I'd wanted all along. Not recognition as a performance, recognition as normal. I ate my eggs. I drank my coffee. Linda watched the room carefully, like she was making sure this wasn't going to turn into gossip. Then she stood and walked toward the counter where the waitress was wiping down a spot already clean. She spoke quietly. I couldn't hear the words, but a moment later, the waitress stepped out from behind the counter and faced the diner. Her hands were still. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried. "I want to say something," she began. People leaned in. Some looked defensive already, like they expected a lecture. She didn't lecture. She didn't name names. She simply said, "A man came in here every morning for weeks. People made assumptions about him. We handled it wrong." She glanced toward Chief Walker and Linda Park. "And I'm asking you to do better. Dignity isn't conditional." The silence after that was heavy. No one booed, no one laughed. A few regulars nodded slowly. A man near the back lowered his head. The woman in the corner stared at the floor like she wished she could erase the story she'd made. Chief Walker didn't interrupt. He didn't turn the moment into a demonstration. He simply stood beside my table like a guard who had decided his job was protection, not suspicion. When the waitress finished, she returned to the counter. The room kept breathing. Then, just as I thought the moment would settle, something else happened. A local news crew arrived. Not at the start, not because someone wanted drama, because Linda Park had reached out. Because when truth is delayed, sometimes it needs a spotlight to keep it from being buried again. I saw a camera on a tripod being set up near the entrance. A reporter spoke with Chief Walker. His posture was firm and controlled. He wasn't trying to sell a story. He was trying to stop a wrong one from repeating. The reporter glanced toward me. She walked up and asked, "Sir, do you mind if we ask you?" Before she could finish, I stood up and held my hand out gently, stopping the question without turning it into conflict. I didn't need the world to hear my words. I only needed them to see what they'd been wrong about. So I let Chief Walker speak. He did it simply. He explained that a complaint had come in based on appearance. He explained that it was corrected. He explained that Robert Harlan had been recognized after records were checked. No violence, no accusations, no sensational details, just correction. When the reporter asked what he did in the past, Chief Walker didn't grandstand. He looked at Linda Park, then at me, and he said, "He earned his honors. We confirmed it. That's enough." That line landed in the diner like a final piece of truth clicking into place. The reporter nodded, then lowered her mic. "Thank you," she said to Chief Walker. Then she looked at me again. Her eyes were different now, not curious, not suspicious, respectful. But she still didn't ask for my story. She just asked for something smaller. "Can we at least show your medals?" I felt the weight of that request. Not because I didn't want to be seen, because I didn't want to turn my service into entertainment. So I adjusted my jacket carefully. I didn't pull everything out. I didn't make it a display. I just let the camera catch the edge of what had already been recognized. A ribbon, a patch, the curve of a campaign pin. Enough for the trained eyes in the room. Enough for the reporter to understand this wasn't a costume. The camera clicked. The diner's mood changed again. Now it was the kind of quiet that comes from learning something too late. As they prepared to leave, a man at the next table, one of the ones who'd shifted his chair away from me early on, finally stood. He hesitated as if his throat had dried up. He walked toward my table slowly. "I'm sorry," he said. His voice was low, not performative. He wasn't looking for forgiveness in exchange for a sentence. He was simply offering what he should have offered weeks ago. "I didn't know," he added. I didn't correct him. I didn't say he should have known. I didn't say he could have asked. He didn't need my lesson. He needed his own conscience to stop hiding. So I nodded once, acknowledging without making it a debate. And because I never bragged, I also never pretended the apology fixed everything. Loneliness doesn't vanish in a single moment, but dignity can return if the world finally chooses to recognize it. After the crew left, the diner returned to its normal sounds, cups clinking, forks tapping plates, the faint hum of the fridge. The difference was that now people looked at me like I was a person they could see, not like a threat, not like a problem, like a veteran who had walked through their own mornings alone. A few customers didn't come around right away, but one by one their eyes held less distance. The waitress came by and refilled my coffee without being asked. She didn't smile too big. She just did the small kindnesses she should have been doing from the start. Linda Park didn't linger after her part was done. She told the waitress she'd check in later. Chief Walker spoke to her briefly, then he looked back at me. "Robert," he said. He didn't use the word sir like it was a barrier. He used it like it was a respect. "I want you to know the next time someone misunderstands you," he said, "we'll listen before we act." I considered telling him that it wouldn't be perfect, that misunderstanding is human, that fear is easy. But what I said instead was quiet. "Thank you," I replied, because I had learned something in the years since I'd left my uniform. Real recognition isn't loud. It isn't a parade. It's the willingness to stop, check facts, and treat a man like he matters even when he isn't talking. In the days afterward, I kept showing up, not as a challenge, not as a reminder, just as a man doing his routine. The diner became steadier. The conversations shifted. One morning, a regular asked the waitress, "You know that Patch guy? He's not what I thought." The waitress answered, "He never was." That was the kind of truth that doesn't need to prove itself twice. Another day, a kid came in with his dad. The kid glanced at me and then at his dad. The kid asked, "Is that the man from the news?" The dad looked at me for a long second, then crouched so his eyes were level. He didn't shush the kid. He didn't scold. He said, "Yes, and you don't have to be afraid of him. You just have to treat people the way you'd want to be treated." I felt something in my chest loosen. Not joy like fireworks, relief. The small release of tension that comes when the next generation learns the right lesson. I still didn't brag. I still didn't explain myself. I didn't stand and demand anyone recognize me. My record didn't need my mouth. It only needed time. Because time has a way of turning labels into facts and rumors into mistakes. I remember my last morning with the same table. The diner was bright that day, clear skies, late winter sun. I sat down and watched the door. It opened and a man walked in wearing a thick jacket. Not the same thick jacket man from before. Different face, different eyes. He approached the counter, scanning the room. His posture was too tense, too guarded, as if he was still looking for risk. He saw me. His eyes widened slightly. He looked away like before. But this time something different happened. He didn't just look away and pretend I wasn't there. He turned back. He took a step toward the counter. And when the waitress asked what he wanted, I heard him say, "I saw the news. I'm sorry about what happened before. I didn't mean..." His voice broke on the word meant. The waitress didn't correct him. She just reassured him. "I know," she said. "We're learning." The man returned to his table and exhaled. He didn't stare at me with fear. He stared with recognition. He stared with shame, fading into growth. That morning, I finished my eggs and left a tip. I didn't leave a note. I didn't ask for a handshake. When I stood by the door, Chief Walker stepped outside to speak briefly with the waitress. Linda Park was there too, holding a clipboard. They were arguing about something minor, scheduling paperwork or a community event. Normal life. That's what I wanted. And as I walked to my car, I caught one last glimpse of Linda Park looking up at the diner sign, then back at me. She gave a small nod, not as a reward, as an acknowledgement. And I realized that the revenge, if you could call it that, had never been about punishing anyone. It wasn't about forcing their eyes to widen. It wasn't about making them feel small. It was about a truth that had been treated like a danger. A veteran who had been dismissed because silence looked like menace. The dignity I demanded was simple: to be seen accurately, to be treated with the same respect owed to anyone who served. No shouting, no drama, just the moment when the right record met the wrong assumption and the world finally corrected itself. I drove away with my day beginning the way it always began: alone, quiet, and still moving forward. But now the loneliness wasn't the same. Because at least for one small stretch of mornings, a room full of strangers had learned how to look. And they did it because they had to. Not because I asked. Because the truth arrived in the only way it ever truly does. Through the evidence that can't be argued with.